What's going on? Back at you live, the Trampled Under, Mark, Eloy. That's how we roll. What up?
My blood pressure. No, actually, no. I'm so relaxed now. If I relax anymore, I'll be in a coma.
Good.
So, just, it's what happens when you get a good night's sleep. I even actually felt like getting up and leaving the house today. We went and did some stuff downtown, came back here, chilled out, had some dinner, relaxed. Now I'm ready to go.
Just to leave it on live, I as a record
Mhm.
in the green room, I was just telling Mark, which we're not gonna touch on unless it ends up somehow
Mhm.
being valuable somehow. But I watched one video and a quarter of a 4 video series of lectures that are 3.5 hours each over the expansion of the Yamnaya, the Celtic, same difference. Other people are more nuanced, but roundabout expansion into the rest of Europe and other parts towards the west and even south and whatnot, just everywhere. And it's 3.5 hours roughly of videos per video, and it's just so much material that I'm enjoying it, but it's the sort of thing where you have to sit, watch it one time, pick the things that make sense to you in terms of how to put the blocks together, and then you have to revisit it so that you can encompass the whole spectrum of the thing. And with 4 videos of 3 hours each, there's enough there in what they've recently discovered about 3000 BC,
Mhm.
genetically, linguistic, like all these things, that you could literally base a whole lifetime of study just on the freaking 4 videos that they have. Is I guess that's kind of the thing that I wanted to tell you earlier in the thing, that it's so much volume that there's more information in those videos. There's more information in those videos in 2024 than probably half of the existence of the right of the written form. It's just boom, mind blowing.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Well, you got to figure they're talking about their life's work and something like that. They've been working on this and studying on this their entire lives, just about, or at least their entire careers since the advent of DNA technology.
no,
You
and linguistics and
hmm
archaeology, like they're all there
Yeah.
because one of the casualties of this whole thing is that archaeologists have had to, in a sense,
hmm
eat a little bit of humble pie when it comes to not their findings,
hmm
but after having the data, the conclusions that they've reached.
hmm
And there's people that have written whole books
hmm
where they show the data,
hmm
but they're focused also on the conclusions. And nobody likes to feel like an idiot when it comes. And so there's a little bit of that, not in the videos, but so the DNA is a pivotal thing because it ties in all the other things, and if it all matches,
hmm
it points in the direction of this, that, or the other.
Well, but it is, as you say, these people are specialists in a certain field, and archaeologists are looking at this. Yes, all that data is out there. But as you say, this is four 3.5 hour videos over the course of 4 days.
Yeah.
How much of this was brand new to all these people? Who has time to study what your specialty is and study what other people are coming in with? You know, it's kind of sort of like intelligence gathering. You have certain people out collecting data, then they send that data. It's not their job to put two and two together to get four. They collected number two, send it on. It's somebody else's job to put all that together. Now they're going to go and get more information. You have analysts that analyze the data and say, what does this mean? This means this because of this record. We can safely say that this means this and that means that. Then they send it on to somebody else. It's that somebody else who's supposed to take all these sources of information, put them together and come to a conclusion. So, I can't blame the archaeologist for having one conclusion when that's all he sees, he or sees. I can't really blame them. And if they have to back up and say, yeah, we can speculate that it was from this time to that time, but if the evidence points to earlier or later, we have to accept that. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's exactly it. And they're doing all that. They're fighting it out
Mm-hmm.
in an intelligent way, however they do. But there's so much information there,
Mm-hmm.
new concepts
Yeah.
concerning civilizations that they've archaeologically recorded,
Mm-hmm.
but now they have DNA stuff.
Yeah.
And me watching it as a passive observer, soaking it in, it's mostly all brand new to me, other than the basics that I
Mhm.
usually talk about,
Sure.
which are basically footnote basics of what's going on. It's not like I'm in a lab and hearing the arguments
Mm-hmm.
over what they're testing. It's a different thing. I'm at the receiving end of this whole,
Yeah.
I guess, waterfall of information. But I am surprised at the amount of freaking information, dude. It's insane, Mark. It's freaking insane. And so, yeah, I just
It's a
wanted to
lot
share
to
that.
absorb. It's a lot to be absorbed.
Yeah, three
And
thousand, no, like 5,000 years of history
mhm,
when we can't even get the 20th century more or less set up proper
yeah.
in our heads. Like if you ask me right now, I know I've said it before, but if you ask me, hey man, tell me about the 1910s, everything you know about the 1910s as an example,
Hmm.
I could give you a few points that
Yeah.
are
I could
reference
I
points,
could name one or two, but that'd be about it.
right? And
You
it's
know.
easily accessible to us, but at the same time, is that applicable to our daily life? And unless you're studying such a thing and whatnot, and this and
Right.
that. So imagine 5,000.
Yeah. Well,
It's
that's what I mean. This is specialist study. This is their specialty. This is what they do. So of course they're going to be educated on it. Whereas I'm going to sit there and go, say what? You know. So
yeah,
but we need people like this. We really do. That's how society moves forward as far as education is concerned, and as far as discovery is concerned. We need those people to do these kind of things. I know a lot of people will be like, well, how come they're not trying to find a cure for cancer? Well, who says they're not? But the people who are archaeologists, they're not medical doctors, they're not researchers, they're not that's not what they do. But we need archaeologists. So, they're it's not like they're investigating the spread of society in Europe at the expense of cancer research. They both happen simultaneously. So, there's 8 billion people on the planet. There's enough people that you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and we'll both progress together. So everybody has value. We need all of these people.
it's going to take, in my opinion, maybe a century as
Mhm.
a roundabout for the information that's being worked on,
Mhm.
which has to do with all the concepts that we take for granted on a daily basis in terms
Mhm.
of heritage and all the things
Yeah.
and the problems that occurs from it, which we've touched on in the past.
Mhm.
I think roughly it'll take 100 years for it to sort of filter into the mainstream paradigm of a reality. Like for instance, when you say, I don't know, Rome, maybe not everybody on the street knows the details, but they know roughly, oh, Rome. They might even throw out something like pizza or some who knows what.
Yeah, it's
But
a city in Italy. Okay. Yeah.
so, but there's a lot of people that know a little bit about Rome more than
Mhm.
average. I don't know, maybe an emperor, Julius Caesar, like little basic things.
Mhm.
For this to get to that stage of some sort of basic, oh yeah, yeah, I've
Yeah.
heard of that.
Yep.
I think it'll take at least 100 years. I don't know if it's going to be 100 years, but I'm saying, and it's that important because it speaks to the history of mankind. Or
Sure.
Egypt. When you say pyramids, everybody knows pyramids roughly,
Hmm. They may not know what they're for, but they've heard of the pyramids.
right? So for stuff like this that's so involved,
Mhm.
I think it'll take like 100 years or more.
Maybe,
Yeah, maybe for it
maybe.
to spread into a common, like, have you heard of this DNA thing in terms of
Yeah.
this complication of like the Bronze Age and this and that?
Hmm.
I think at some point these things are going to show up in school textbooks, as opposed to the history, like all the textbooks we have now
Hmm.
will be obsolete.
Well,
Obsolete.
they're becoming obsolete at a more rapid pace now than they ever have. I mean, you're pretty safe with math books, but as far as history, sociology, anthropology, any of that, every new discovery changes some form of information. Some little tidbit is changed. You know, it's inevitable. But you get to the point to where the textbooks can't keep up. And I mean, I don't know. I haven't been in a classroom for any length of time since the 1970s. So I don't know if they're even using textbooks anymore. I mean, I would not be surprised to hear that no, they don't have textbooks anymore. Everything is done through this study program online or that study program online, and these are the sources. So God only knows, you
Yeah,
know.
we're living in a. This is one angle,
Hmm.
and I know we've lived through it through all our lives in the 20th century. And I guess people even before could have said, "Man, things were really technological." Even back in the 1900s,
Hmm.
early part, even 1800s, with many inventions. Even back then, not from our vantage point, but if we step back and look at it from their shoes,
Hmm.
um, living in the late 1800s wasn't like living in the early 1800s by any stretch,
No.
in terms of access in certain
Hmm.
places, but like in a general sense to certain information, certain this and that. But with between the computer, access to so many things, and it could be anything.
Yeah.
We're just talking about this one thing, but like even something even more to do with something less heavy, I could argue, but comic books. I all my life, like this is going from one extreme to the other, but just to make the point of the
Hmm.
topic or of this thing, I all my life I was like, well, hell, um, how about all those early issues of X-Men comic books and the Hulk, which you'd see once in a blue moon in a magazine or some sort of reference back in the day,
Hmm.
and now I'm seeing people busting, hey, I just acquired my
Yeah.
original Hulk #1, and like, and it's due to online back and forth
Yeah.
that these things are popping up so that the rest of us have access according to our interest.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's we're
And
living in an explosion of information.
well, yeah, an instant transmission of that information. I mean, if you think back to before the telegraph, where somebody had to write something down, then give it to somebody to take to them, be it a messenger or even just through the mail or something like that. But everything was written down, so communication moved at the speed of man. How fast could you get from A to B? If you're in an office on the third floor, you could probably give it to a messenger and have it delivered to somebody on the first floor fairly quickly. If they were in the next town over, it might be tomorrow. If they were 2 states away, it could be 5 days. Then the telegraph came along, and now all of a sudden you can communicate from New York to Philadelphia instantly, just like that. And then as it moved progressively further and further west, you had basically the news headlines instantaneously going to the West Coast. Then the newspapers would catch up 6 months later when they finally got through on the wagon train. Then the Transcontinental Railroad, okay, we brought it down to 2 weeks. But you can still get that headline almost instantaneously. But you couldn't find out the whole story until the newspapers caught up. Then suddenly there was radio. In radio, they could transmit the entire story through a wide region. And then more and more people would pick up on the story. And then wire services became a thing. And then pretty soon there's a cable that goes across the Atlantic Ocean. And now we can get communication to and from Europe instantaneously. It's basically an extension of all that, but every step along the way changed the world for these people.
It was in advance, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, it's an
so
amazing thing, and we are in a I think in a very consequential time in terms of that,
yeah,
due to the fact that you can have your education and eat it too.
yeah.
Online immediately.
But the thing about that is, I am glad to see more and more people taking advantage of the education opportunities that are out there, because you and I both know the internet is the home of funny cat videos, herbal Viagra, and Nigerian princes. They're all over the place. But there are also places on the internet where you can find out about what you're talking about, the spread of society throughout Western Europe. You can find out about that. Now, 4 3-hour videos is not everybody's cup of tea, and that's understood. But how long is it going to be before people start breaking that down and putting it into consumable sections? That maybe they're going to focus on this one region of France, and maybe they're going to focus on this one region of what became the Netherlands or Germany or whatever, and make it relevant to the people that live there and occupy those spaces. And now it's easily digestible for those folks, and maybe a little bit easier to digest for everybody else, depending upon what because they have to boil it down. But depending upon what they choose to omit and what they choose to keep, I mean, the choices are endless out there. There are a lot of archaeology channels on the web. There are a lot of anthropology and sociology channels on the web. A lot of people don't partake, and that's fine. Maybe they're not interested, but the opportunity is there. And as more and more people do partake, I mean, look at how many views those videos have. It may be 200-300, but that indicates to me 200 or 300 people that want to digest all that information because they're just as curious as you are. And it would be just as easy to sit and watch cat videos all night.
Not really. I mean, for me,
Well,
because
not for you, but you know what I mean.
I can watch cat videos,
mm-hmm.
but you can get in a loop with even
Sure,
that.
sure. Oh, I
And
know. I
there's value.
dive.
There's value in cat videos.
Well, I'm guilty of sin of doing that, man. I will find a channel that interests me. Either I like the style, I like the way it's presented, I like the personality of the presenter. Well, I sent you a couple of videos from a guy who calls himself the Fat Electrician. He's hilarious to me. I like the way he presents the information. It's most of it is military history, not all of it. I mean, Linda and I watched a video last night about a gentleman by the name of Joe Medicine Crow, who in World War II became the last war chief of his tribe and possibly the last Native American war chief, because there are 4 tasks that you have to accomplish. And he's the last person to be able to accomplish it. And the last task, there was his nephew almost became a war chief during the Vietnam War, but there is one task that's getting increasingly harder and harder and harder to do. And that is you must steal an enemy's horse.
Just
And that's the one that kept his nephew from becoming a war chief. Was the whole time he was in Vietnam, he could not find a horse, an enemy horse to steal. He was on patrol one day and he heard a bunch of noise behind him, kind of stuck, hid himself behind a tree, and there was an enemy combatant leading two elephants with laden with supplies. He dispatched the enemy, stole those two elephants, and the council elders said that was very cool, but elephants aren't horses. Sorry. So he didn't become a war chief. It's just the way he tells the story, the information he presents, and an interview with 100-year-old Joe Medicine Crow. You know, an interview with this old guy. Yeah, I'm a very famous horse thief. Laughing, laughing, laughing. You know, it was he stole 50 German horses during World War II. So, you know, it I go on these binges where I find channels like that, and now I got to go back and watch everything you ever did, man, because it's entertaining as hell.
it's great.
And it is, but it's also a massive time suck because I'll go on YouTube and I'll look for something. Let's say I want to look for, oh, I don't know, how to, I want to get some idea on how to plant a lilac bush out in the front yard. And I don't know, do lilacs need special? Do they got to be in more sun? Do they got to be in more shade? Where am I going to put it? Any special soil conditions I need to watch out for, anything like that. So I'll go on and I'll look and I'm planting a lilac bush. Okay. And I find the video, and then they know they've got me because there are suggested videos down in the feed. And so I'm looking like that. Oh, that looks cool. Oh, wait a minute. I'm interested in that. Wait a minute. I got to check this out. So I started out wanting to know how to plant a lilac bush. And 6 hours later, I'm watching giraffes fight out in the Serengeti. And it's like, where the hell did the day go?
Hmm.
You know, I didn't get the lilac bush planted. I know how to do it. I think I remember. I got to go back to my history and watch that video again.
Yeah,
So it's a massive time suck. I got to be real careful about that.
yeah. There's other things to do, but
Yeah.
you know,
But you know what? But I justify it to myself. I say, well, I don't watch television. Well, but you can watch 4 hours of YouTube videos. That's better.
it's a little better.
How? I mean, maybe I'm getting educated in some things, but you got to admit a lot of it is just time killer. You know,
It's all time killer.
sure, but you're trying to find information, but I get easily distracted because, my attention span is squirrel, and that's how it goes. But I know it, so
Yeah, me too. I've got too many interests that I'd like to
yeah.
focus on. So, what do you end up doing? You end up doing that you're saying.
Mhm.
Um, but you need to refresh the mind too. You can't, like, for instance,
That's true.
you can't just take in three
No.
hours of four videos um, and expect to come away with. You have to digest it.
Yeah, you do. And like I say, you have to go back to, did I get this right, or did I confuse a couple things? Go back and try to find that section. And oh, okay, yeah, all
and
right.
and and look for definitions as to
Mm-hmm.
what they're talking about when it comes to a civilization or
Yeah.
some town in Europe
Mm-hmm.
where this is taking place. Like, you have to, so
Yeah.
you know what the hell's going on. So it does take, So I the whole thing of time suck. I guess it's true, but
Well, if it's constructive, I don't consider it to be a time suck. But if it's, I don't know. I think, and this is part of how I was raised. if you're getting something done, if you're gathering information towards a goal, then it's productive.
What if the goal is just to learn new stuff?
That's productive. But if it's just mindless entertainment, there's a time and a place for that. And when I've got somebody waiting outside with a lilac bush going, how much fertilizer do I put in this? It's not the time to be watching cat videos. It's the time to be checking up, okay, yeah, we got to put this fertilizer here and, bury it to where the roots are so deep. Okay, fine. And then get back outside. You know, there will be time in the evening after dinner when normally folks would sit in front of the TV and relax. Then I can sit down and watch Keyboard Cat or something like that, because there's nothing on TV that I really want to watch. Of course, then again, I haven't looked at the TV to see if there's anything I want to watch in so many years. I may have missed some really cool things,
The
but
TV's
I doubt it.
the TV's
So,
it's
well, I get to pick what I want to watch at the time. If I want to watch something that the James Webb Telescope saw, I can watch it. If I want to watch, and this brings about an interesting topic, I watched a couple nights ago this young couple watch the original three Star Wars movies, and each of their videos was about 45 minutes long. I watched them watch the first three videos, having never seen it before. It's the first time they'd ever seen it. And
the
after the
originals.
first, yeah, the originals. And after the first movie, they were like, yeah, okay, I can see why people like this. This was pretty good. After the second one, they were like, oh man, I am in this. Now I'm invested. Then the third one, Return of the Jedi, they were like, "Oh, this was awesome. Now I know what everybody was talking about." I only wish some theater was playing this because I would love to see all this on a huge screen with a good sound system. It's like I like to see that excitement that I felt when I saw it for the first time,
Which
you
you can
know.
only feel the first time.
Right. So but I can live vicariously through other people discovering it for the first time. And that kind of brings a thrill to me. I enjoy watching people enjoy the things I used to enjoy. It's kind of like, okay, if you could watch a movie or listen to an album again for the first time, what would that movie and what would that album be? Knowing now, maybe you've listened to it a million times. Is there an album that you can think of the first time you heard that album? It was like, oh my God. And you'd love to have that feeling again.
I don't have one album. I have volumes of albums, but
Mm-hmm.
out of one, it could be any of the ones that I could think of.
Mm-hmm.
But I could just as easily say that it's a tough one to decide on one.
Yeah.
But
Well,
what the hell? I'll say Pet Sounds, and for the movie, I'll say Back to the Future just for the heck of it. But there's so
okay.
many. It
Right.
doesn't.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. There are
Yeah,
too many to pick a favorite.
yeah. I mean, it's.
But it's that feeling of when you walked out of the theater going, damn, that was a good movie. Or you
I don't
took
remember.
off or you took off the headphones after the end of side two and I gotta listen to that again.
I
That
don't
was
remember
amazing.
the first time I saw Back to the Future.
Mm-hmm.
I know I saw it in the movie theaters, but I can't detail it because I saw so many movies.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, it was a really cool movie. But if I use my memory,
Mm-hmm.
something that impacted me when I walked out of the movie theater
Mm-hmm.
would have been I can name so many off the top of my head. Indiana Jones and the
Mm-hmm.
Temple of Doom. Saw it in the movie theaters here in Sweetwater Cinema with my dad. I was very little. It
Mm-hmm.
was Raiders of the Lost Ark whenever that happened.
Yeah.
I remember Rambo with the Russian.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that with my dad. For some reason, I found it significant to see all that violence with um, Death Wish. I forget
Mm-hmm.
which of the Death Wish. I saw the Pink Panther. on screen with my dad.
Mm-hmm.
The Los Three Amigos with my grandfather. I
Mm-hmm.
saw Return of the Jedi with my mother. Star Wars with
Mm-hmm.
my aunt. So I remember key, but which one? But I don't remember the one that I told you, Back to the Future.
Mm-hmm.
Any specific? Like if I know I saw it in the theaters. I remember that,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember who I saw it with or any of the details. And yet I chose that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how that works, but I chose that one.
But it's basically the feeling that you had after you saw it for the first time that tells me that you have that interest in that nostalgic feeling. And I mean, I don't know. For the album, I bought Boston's debut album, Boston, having only heard More Than a Feeling. And we're talking like the week it came out. So we're looking at 76,
Mhm.
77 maybe. I had only heard More Than a Feeling. That was the first single off of that album. And I listened to side one and I couldn't wait to flip that over and start side two. When I took off the headphones, because my father was working graveyard, so the only way I could really listen to music was through headphones on the stereo. When side two was over and I put the needle lifted and went back over and sat down on it, I took off my headphones, and it's the first time I can remember ever saying there is not a bad song on that album. There is not one single song that I would skip on that album.
They're all catchy.
Every single one could have been a single, except for time constraints. Every single one was dynamite. Was I mean, just absolutely fantastic
Mhm.
from the get go. That's the first time, and it may be the last time I've ever thought that there isn't a bad song on that album. And that is one that I wish I could experience that again. So if it was a case of knowing now what I didn't know then, if I could go back in time and re-experience one album for the first time, that would be it. You
That
know.
album ends with the last track
Mm-hmm.
perfectly because it's such a change up of the rest of the album and yet fits
Mm-hmm.
perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
Acoustic,
Mm-hmm.
um, and so catchy. It's probably you want to listen to the whole album just to get to the last track.
Yeah. Yeah. And every stop along the way is another fantastic ride, man.
Let me take you home tonight.
Exactly. I mean,
I'll be all right.
that's one thing about them that they understood, that there was a time to go hot and heavy and hard, and there was a time to take a breath and just kind of, you know, breathe a little bit. There's plenty of kick ass coming, but we can afford to take a break here. Let's just chill. Now let's ramp it up again.
Well, that was the last song. They ended it on that
Mm-hmm.
note,
Yeah.
which is I found it perfect. They
Yeah.
gave us heavy rock and roll, and then they said, "And before we leave you, we'll give you this acoustic song, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll catch you next time."
Yep. So this is going home, you know. And it's like,
Yeah.
damn, there's not a bad song on that album.
Did you know? I didn't know ever until the internet
Mhm.
that the cover of that album is actually a guitar
If you look
facing.
at it,
Yeah.
it's a series of guitars.
Hmm.
And the first one out they all have a nameplate on them, and you can only read the first one. The nameplate says Boston. You can see that the rest have nameplates, but you can't see what they are. But yeah, I believe me, I studied that album cover when I was sitting there in my bedroom.
I never paid attention to it,
Oh man.
in terms of what it meant because
Hmm.
when I was growing up and would see the album cover,
Hmm.
it's funny. At the same time, parallel
Hmm.
were video games. And if you remember the covers of those space alien shoot 'em ups video games, they had similar sort of like space
Yeah.
UFO type
Hmm.
things. And for some reason, without questioning it, all throughout the 80s, 90s, and even into
Hmm.
till just a few years ago, um, I just thought it was a cool cover
Mhm.
that maybe had something to do with video game, asteroid, space stuff because it looked like that.
Yeah. Well, see,
Um, yeah,
video games weren't out yet when I bought that album. So the only frame of reference I had was that album cover. And that was a thing. You bought the album, you put it on the turntable, put on the headphones, and that guitar came in for More Than a Feeling, and you just started vibing and started grooving with it, adjusted the volume, and then you studied the cover.
and
You
ELO
studied the back of the cover. You studied the liner notes. If you were lucky, you had the little paper sleeve that had the lyrics printed on both sides.
and
You know,
ELO reminded me the cover of Simon game Simon Says
yeah,
I think it is.
yeah,
Um, but it still had
Simon.
that UFO type. So
Hmm.
all those albums like that, when I would see them in the '80s, um, my reference point to without thinking of studying
Hmm.
the cover, um, was video games because that's what the cartridges would show, like very graphical, cool
Right.
representations of very minimalistic
Hmm.
technological games.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was the connection that I had in my mind. In fact, just as an aside with covers, I did hear that the Beastie Boys' first album, which or second, I don't know which one, second or first, "License to Ill,"
Hmm.
it had an airplane
Uh-huh.
smashing into a wall that you can't see,
Hmm.
and I heard that it was a reefer. It was representing a reefer. And when I well, let me just say the thing so I
Hmm.
don't. And back then, I remember hearing about it and
Hmm.
looking at it and saying, "Where's the reefer?" Because as a kid,
Yeah.
you're not a reefer person. You're just what do they mean it's a reefer? I remember analyzing the cover and thinking, "What reefer?"
Well, that was the problem with cassettes and CDs because you only got half of the artwork. If you flipped that album over and looked at vinyl,
Yeah.
you saw the other half of the aircraft crashing into the wall. So you only had the if you only had
Oh,
the
it was a
front
mountain. It
cover
was a mountain, right?
or crashing into I don't remember what it was crashing in. I didn't own the album, but I remember checking it out at the record store. And you flip the back of it over and oh, there's the other half of the artwork. And then it was something else like for instance Wings Over America, Paul McCartney live album, Paul McCartney and Wings, their live album set. It was a double album, so you flipped it open and there was a huge painted, it was airbrush mural style. It of the whole band on stage with a little bit of smoke effects and the bright light shining on them just right and all this other kind of stuff, different colored lights. And I always thought that would be cooler than hell on the side of a van because custom vans were big at that time, with the decked out interior and everybody had murals on the sides of them and stuff like that. It's been, 20, 30,000 on a paint job alone. But you didn't get that cover art unless you had the vinyl and you opened it up because it was all on the inside,
I don't
you know.
remember, but I just looked it up. They have the fold out,
Hmm.
and it's the side of a mountain, barely
It is
seen,
side of a mountain. Okay.
but it's barely so you can see the whole thing. But it
Hmm.
represented the reef.
Yeah.
There was a band in the '70s and '80s, mostly '80s, I think,
Hmm.
called Rainbow,
Yeah. Ronnie James Dio, with lead singer.
and Dio was the singer.
Hmm.
And I owned only one album from there,
Hmm.
and I forget the title. I'm sure I could look it up just like I did this one, but I owned the record,
Hmm.
and the cover was a photograph, '80s style, of an operatic scene with a guy taking a broadsword up towards a dragon, but you could tell it's like a stage production. And I always found that cover weird because it was unlike the graphically cool
Hmm.
covers. It was sort of like somebody went out, took a picture of a play. It was what the impression,
Hmm.
but yet the music was badass. It was
Was
so.
it was it Holy Diver?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you now as we go.
because I don't know if you've ever seen the video to Holy Diver.
I have.
Um, Dio was very operatic, very operatic.
He was.
And I have heard a couple of different opera singers who have, they call it vocal analysis. It's a reaction video, but it's vocal analysis. There are a couple who are absolutely obsessed with Ronnie James Dio. They said he had a very operatic voice, and
Mhm.
he is just absolutely their favorite singer in any of the rock genres. They just absolutely obsess over that guy. But I mean, with his stint in Rainbow, with his stint with Black Sabbath, and his solo career, he had that certain flair about him that it was, yes, it was rock. Yes, it was heavy, but it was also very operatic.
I can't seem to find it, dude. I'm sorry. Um, for some reason, I had.
Did you ever buy an album simply for the cover? The cover art just made you buy that album. Maybe you've never heard of the band, maybe you've never heard anything off the album, but you had to have that cover.
Talk to the hand. I'm not that shallow.
Oh, I
Let me
am.
get my let me get my bandana.
Oh, I am. I bought my first Molly Hatchet album based on the Frank Frazetta painting on the cover. I just thought that was the coolest album cover in the world and was hoping like hell it was good music.
I'm being sarcastic with my comment. You know that
Understood.
because obviously that's not true. Because we've talked that I
Mhm.
have done that exact same thing you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. Well,
Jim Bashir says, "Yeah, the White Album. He loves winter."
that's a that's that's one for the that's one for the books because if you didn't know anything about the Beatles, didn't know anything about anything,
Mhm.
and you saw a white album cover, um, you wouldn't go
There's
to
nothing.
it. There's
Yeah,
nothing
there's
to,
nothing about that cover that would entice you to buy it if you didn't know who the Beatles were.
right.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was an album. Now this is after the fact.
Mhm.
I would suggest towards the end of the good era of the 20th century of music. Not that there
Mhm.
wasn't other stuff after, because there was, but it was during the grunge era, and the band was Pearl Jam,
Mhm.
out of Portland, Oregon,
Mhm.
or Portland, Maine,
Well,
Portland, Oregon.
they're either from Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, Washington, one of the two, and I really don't remember which because it wasn't. I never owned a Pearl Jam album. That just wasn't my style.
Well, the first album that they released, just as a
Mhm.
note, was a game changer.
Mhm.
These were the people that shut the door, whether they knew it or not at the time,
Mhm.
to glam music. The era of T Rex that kicked off with T Rex and Ziggy Stardust and all the bands in the 80s, from Guns N' Roses all the way through to
Mhm.
whatever, Twisted Sister and
Yeah.
the Motley Crues and LA Guns and just the whole list of, all these people, was the grunge movement with Nirvana. But a close second in line in that same era of the early 90s, 91, 90, 91,
Mhm.
89, that era. Um, Not 30 years ago, just. It's been 20 something. Well, wait a second. No, it's been about 30 something years, no?
Mhm. Yeah.
And I consider that just yesterday, roughly.
Mhm.
Although, I'm getting the point.
Yeah. 1994 was 30 years ago, homeboy.
I'm getting the point. So when Pearl Jam comes out,
Mhm.
and by the way, they were as sophisticated as can be. Their first album, which I think was called Alive, was a tour de force of musical um, a musical debut
Mhm.
that is intelligent, even though it has the grunge aspect of
Mhm.
whatever. But the music choices that were made were completely intricate, intelligent, um, lyrically, musically. It was wildly well recorded to such a pristine level of fidelity, audio wise. In my opinion, that album cannot be denied. I mean, do so at your own discretion. But
Mhm.
their follow up album saw a breaking apart of their pristine, clean debut in subtle ways. Something happened. It was brilliant. Their second album, which I think was called, I'll tell you right now. This is a key thing. I mean, Pearl Jam's second album. Okay, their second album was called Verses, and it had a decomposition of neatness in the way they constructed their songs,
Mhm.
even though it wasn't totally obvious. It was to me in a sense. The first album was a production connected to the 80s with high quality. This one had more grunge pushing in the
Yeah.
direction of throw caution to the wind and let's be more wild. Their third album, which was called Spin, I think it was called Spin the Black Circle or something. Spin some. Hold on, I'll tell you right now. This is the Pearl Jam's third album. Pearl Jam's third album, Vitology. Okay, this is where I'm getting at. Vitology was the third album, and it came out in '93. My friend picked me up, and we went and stood early morning before the sun at the record store in a line
Mhm. To get it.
to get it. We could have gone later in the day, but we wanted to be the first ones through there.
Mhm.
It was a cover that was in like a like a it just said Vitology on it in yellow,
Mhm.
and it was like there was nothing else to it. That album for that band was a complete destruction of the pristine quality that they had in their first album, and they did so intentionally
Uh-huh.
because they were following their muse. Um, and that's what we're missing. Or I'm gonna say it boldly, although it could people can differ. That's what we're missing when it comes to the music world today. From my perspective, back then you could change the dial and bump into something that sounded pretty freaking wild and radical.
Mhm.
And I guess you could do that today with the internet, but maybe it's my bias.
Well, it might be, but that doesn't make it any less so, because I think every perceived low point in music of any era had that one song that happened to break through that had nothing to do with the music of that era. For instance, disco was hot and heavy. And then along came Dire Straits' Sultans of Swing. Had absolutely nothing to do with the dude. Even Kiss made a couple of disco songs,
And they're good.
but Dire Straits came through with Sultans of Swing, absolutely nothing like disco, and it took off. It was everywhere. Van Halen's um, um, oh come on,
What about
Jump,
love?
Jump. It did the same thing. It broke through. It was like nothing else being played on pop radio at the time. And those two songs right there kind of basically they put disco on hold for a little while. Kansas, Carry On Wayward Son did the same thing. It got rid of all of the sound alike pap that was being played on radio at the time. Then you get into the late 80s when pop radio was all boy bands and Mariah Carey, and it was all sound alike stuff. And then all of a sudden, the Black Rose came along with Hard to Handle. Nothing like anything else that was being played at the time, but was popular as hell. And people just went, yeah.
The Black Crows were, in my opinion, undeniable in what they were doing because
Mhm.
they had a reality, or they had a groundedness, they had an earthy
Mhm.
American sound, in my opinion.
Major nod to blues.
They were referring back to a the 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 darker paths or
Mhm.
less traveled paths of the era in the
Mhm.
late 80s 90s. um they were drawing from the past, like the blues and
Mhm.
good time rock and roll,
Mhm.
but not quite like the Guns N' Roses and people in the
Nope.
80s. um they
They
had a
came in at the end of that. They came in kind of at the end of the hair metal expansion. Guns N' Roses kept it going for a few years, but they were one of the few groups that lasted through that transition into grunge. Because there were a
yeah,
lot of other bands that didn't last through that transition into grunge.
one of the bands that
Mhm.
was very important to me musically, that had been around, but I had only caught wind of it when I went to the mall,
Mhm.
um, was the band that wrote Silent Lucidity, which was
Oh,
Queensryche.
yeah, yeah.
So that album is
Mhm.
magical, even to this day. All of it. They have a song called Jet City Woman. There's something so dystopian about some of the songs, and they have one called they have very creative stuff in the past. They have one called It's About a Dream, and the whole album is about a dream. It's so there's something very magical about that band, but in a very high quality, high bar musicianship that many people might look like, well, they should be a little bit more grungier. There's
Mhm.
that band is so awesome. Period. To this day, love Queensryche. Man, that band was good. Silent Lucidity was just the tip of the sphere with them because they had so many awesome, well prepared songs. My goodness. Oh,
There were some very well produced albums during that time and some very underrated performers, very underrated singers, especially. A lot of great guitarists, and they got a lot of attention, but a lot of the vocalists didn't get, I don't think, didn't get the attention that I think they deserved. Now, you can say what you will about Whitesnake. I don't own a Whitesnake album. That wasn't my style of music. But David Coverdale can just flat out sing. And that's all there is to it. There you cannot deny the man can sing.
no, the band is awesome.
Oh yeah. He is,
If you want it, come and get it.
and he can go from a real simple like here I go again, kind of a smooth and mellow thing that suddenly turns heavy. And he can go 100% all in. That voice can just go all over the place. But the man can damn sure sing. And that's, you just can't deny it. Love him or hate him, the guy can sing.
I don't know who would hate him because I
Hmm.
frankly, back in the day, traded a Kubla Khan cassette,
Hmm.
which had this creature. My
Hmm.
friend Ernie, I was over at his house and I had gleaned
Hmm.
his cassette tape deck, stacking, and Whitesnake was there. And I didn't
Hmm.
own a Whitesnake,
Hmm.
but I wanted a Whitesnake. And I said, "Hey, dude, I have an awesome thrash metal No, I'm sorry. I told him, dude, you have White Snake. I said to him, dude, you have White Snake, as if it's like something like
Uh-huh.
remember we're kids. I said, dude, you have White Snake, and he looks at me and he says, yeah, like saying he doesn't like it at all.
Uh-huh.
And then I thought, dude, I have an
Now's
album.
my chance.
Yeah, I said, dude, I have a set of Kubla Khan, dude. And he said, well, I gotta hear it first. We could trade. Dude, the cover, it's red, and there's this
Hmm.
creature on it, and he says, "Oh, bring it over." I said, "Okay," because I considered Kubla Khan
Hmm.
a nightmare of an album. I don't know. I don't even know how I ended up with it, because
Yeah.
back then we would all trade stuff.
Yeah.
But I brought it to my friend Ernie.
Hmm.
He he pressed play. He says, "All right, let's trade." And I said, "Are you sure?" Like I was winning the upper leg on this one.
Yeah.
Are you sure? And he was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty freaking sure, dude."
Hmm.
And so we switched. That's how I acquired. Actually, that's how I acquired my second Whitesnake album. I had a
Hmm.
previous Whitesnake, so my memory was faulty. I had a
Hmm.
previous one, which is a an apple
Hmm.
with a snake somehow wrapped in it or something. I forget which album it was,
Hmm.
but I love that band.
Yeah.
To
Well,
this,
they get the reputation of being a little bit too poppy. I didn't see it, but other people were like, "White Snake, man, you got that poppy shit," you know. But these are the same people that accuse Metallica of selling out when they put out Enter Sandman. Oh, they just did that so they could get airplay. Well, fine. They're not supposed to eat. They're not supposed to make money, I guess. But who's got the last laugh?
in
There's
Miami,
they're still touring. So
in
who's
in
got the
my,
last laugh?
oh no, they have the last laugh. And by the way, they
Mm-hmm.
rock anyhow. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
In Miami, growing up and throughout the '80s and middle school and whatnot,
Yeah.
um, friends of mine that would sit in class
Mm-hmm.
would have their Walkmans and they would have their cassettes, and we
Mm-hmm.
would all look at each other's cassette tapes, and
Sure.
everybody had cassette tapes in class,
Yeah.
and we would listen to low and like just
Mm-hmm.
like cheating the system.
Yeah.
Um, that was all part of the spirit of the era.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't talk about that, but that was widespread. Kids
Yeah.
had Walkmans in class,
Mm-hmm.
and if you were really a rebel, you'd be listening to it sitting at the back of the class. But in any event, and I was without a rebel without a clue. In any event, my friend, a lot of these kids were coming from other countries across South
Mm-hmm.
America, Argentina, Chile, whatever the different places, and one of them had an assortment of Anthrax
Mm-hmm.
albums, and we would switch tapes. And I'm just saying this because, well, it's part of the things that happened back then, but the heavy metal. But when the grunge came, it's it it flipped the switch,
Mm-hmm.
ended what came before, and then this whole new world began musically. And at the time, it was cool because it was new.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back at it now, dude,
Well,
hair metal was the best.
that was one of the things that kind of attracted me to the Black Crows when they first came out. I didn't get hot and heavy into them. I saw them in concert, but I was not there to see the Black Crows. I was there to see AC/DC. And I saw them perform, and it's like, these guys are good. And they understand old rock and roll. And like I mentioned before, Hard to Handle, a lot of people, most people don't know that's a cover. That was a B side on an Otis Redding CD back in 64, 65, something like that. That was the B side of a Otis Redding single. But they did it. They stayed true to it. And there were two versions of that song out there. The album version didn't have the horns. The single version, they overdub horns onto it to kind of be more true to the Otis Redding track. The album version was guitars, but they understood that old rock and roll and they stayed true to it. it was a serious nod to Otis Redding and um, Muddy Waters and the people that came before that brought that out. And that's what attracted me to them. It's like, look, they get it. They understand what this is supposed to be about. Because, again, at the time when that album came out, pop radio sounded all the same. New Kids on the Block was the big act. And it was just nothing but, to me, soulless tripe. But AM radio was marketing to 14-year-old girls, and they found their audience, and that's what was selling records. But then come along this other band that had this other sound, and it's like, oh my God.
I mean, on the same musical note, theme, lesser known are the oddities of American, you could say world, but I'm focused here, um, of American songwriters, musicians
Mm-hmm.
that take, again, the side road path and are obscure
Mm-hmm.
in the cultural
Mm-hmm.
average. One such person is Van Dyke Parks.
It's not familiar, but I don't know.
So Van Dyke Parks,
Mm-hmm.
although he has various albums out,
Mm-hmm.
he mostly had most of his work um, composing and arranging for other bands,
Mm-hmm.
um, and writing lyrics.
Okay.
He's the one that penned many of the Beach Boy lyrics during the Smile album era.
Okay.
He's from Hattiesburg.
Okay.
I didn't know that part, and I've listened to. I've been interested in that and watching interviews of him as of late,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew of his interaction with the Beach Boys since back when I
Yeah.
would listen to the offshoot of tracks that never came out, and they discussed it, in to some degree. Um, and I have a couple of his albums. Um, but he's show tune type music
Mm-hmm.
and other things, so he's more into orchestral stuff as well as some Americana stuff that's very very Americana in terms of like acoustic-y and this and that. But in any event, he penned the lyrics to um, uh, what was that song from Smile? The main theme that's very powerful. I've been in this town so long to the city, and fit for the stuff to ride in the rough, and blah 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 blah. Heroes and villains. He wrote
Okay.
he wrote the lyrics to Heroes and Villains, and I find that between the lyrics and the music, I don't know if you arranged it or not. Um, Heroes and Villains lyrics is what I'm looking for. Lyrics, there it is. For some reason, the lyrics of this song and the spirit of Van Dyke's Park, it mixed with Brian Wilson
Uh-huh.
and the Beach Boys, and the writing of the song is, and what this song does is a weird, for me in my little world in my mind, or my big world in my mind. I don't want to minimize myself here. In
Mm-hmm.
my mind, um, represents this series of snapshots of America in a very, in a Western way,
Mm-hmm.
um, in a very psychedelic way, but yet very grounded at the same. Very Beach Boys, very strange, very out of the norm, but yet very normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's, to me, it's a very powerful. lyric and album and song, and I just want to share the just I don't know if you've read the lyrics before, but
Mm-mm.
I find it awesome. It says, "I've been in this town so long that back in the city I've been taken for a loss and gone,
Mm-hmm.
and unknown for a long, long time. I fell in love years ago with an innocent girl from the Spanish and Indian home of the heroes and villains." And then it goes on to say that she got shot down, but she's still unafraid and walking through that town. And he's throwing out these pictures of a story within the confines of this song and the
Yeah.
musical variation that is Brian Wilson. That to me, it's one of the most spectacular things that have come out of the 20th century. And
Mhm.
yet, you can walk out on the road and ask people about it,
And nobody's ever heard of them.
and nobody's heard of him. And
Hmm.
the song is more or less nobody. And
Well,
yet, to me, it's as valid as any other song, if not more so in many cases.
and there are a lot of performers and songwriters that are that way. Their popularity came from writing songs for other performers, even though they performed those songs again. Hardly anybody has ever heard of J.D. Souther. Hardly anybody has ever heard of Steve Goodman. But if you've listened to the Eagles, or if you've heard listened to the Eagles, you've heard J.D. Souther. He wrote a lot of their music and co-wrote a lot of stuff with Glenn Frey. Um, Steve Goodman, if you've heard anything by Arlo Guthrie, John Denver, Judy Collins, or the Highwaymen, you have heard Steve Goodman's music. He wrote City of New Orleans for Arlo Guthrie, and that became his second hit. In fact, Arlo Guthrie, when he performs City of New Orleans still to this day, he likes to tell the story about it. He was playing in some little beer bar somewhere up in the Northeast, and he was done, and he was done for the night, and he was sitting at the bar talking with the bartender, and the owner of the club came up and said, Arlo, you got to hear this guy's song. He's got a song to play for you. And Arlo says, "Oh no, don't make me listen to music now. Don't make me listen to songs now." And he looks behind the owner and he sees this kid and he's like, "Please, Mr. Guthrie, let me just play you one song." So he's kind of like, "Okay. All right, I tell you what we're going to do, kid. You're going to buy me a beer and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to drink it. And for however long that beer lasts, you can do whatever the hell you want." So Goodman bought him a beer and he sat there and he played the City of New Orleans for him. He said that was one of the best beers he'd ever had in his life. And it gave him a second number one hit. He recorded City of New Orleans just a few weeks later. But nobody's ever heard of Steve Goodman. But he's released 3 albums of his own. He died in '84 of leukemia, but he released 3 albums of his own. Nobody's ever heard of him.
There's an aspect of what I want to call for this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. There's this thing called being weird. Being weird in the eyes of others,
Mm-hmm.
or being odd,
Mm-hmm.
or marching to the beat of a different drum,
Mm-hmm.
out of place with what others might or might not be doing, but just out of place, slightly askew.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when it comes to art, when it comes to music, um, and returning to Van Dyke Parks, and he's not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
When you, so it's a tough one because you have to be in the right mindset and open to the right vibrations in order to glean wisdom from outwardly may not seem um, to have any.
Mm-hmm.
Not that that's the case with Van Dyke Parks at all. Totally opposite, but some might perceive it.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a tall um, Jettison figure
No.
of he's a small guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's an extremely well mannered and well spoken person.
Hmm.
Um, and he's full of insight. And there's various interviews with him online
Yeah.
speaking about his views of music. And dude, he chooses words because he's a lyricist. And
Hmm.
if you write lyrics like he writes, like he wrote for Brian Wilson,
Yeah.
oh boy. Well, he's really intent on what the words he chooses to represent what he wants to be said, and that's considered odd by some, I assume, and have seen. I, if you watch his interviews,
Hmm.
if you're interested, or anyone out there in the future, whatnot, you'll notice he is, as he's talking to the person he's being interviewed by,
Yeah.
he hits it within the conversation. He tosses out little clever isms,
Hmm.
kind of like a reference back to your back at the ranch type thing.
Hmm.
In context of what he's talking about, he'll throw
Sure.
in little clever
Yeah.
isms or summaries, but in a clever way
Yeah.
that is so inspiring. And because he's performing, he's performing as he's talking.
Hmm.
He's giving us value while he's talking
Hmm.
by using the English language, dangerously using it, because the danger is you can have, or you can step into a situation where the road has a dead end and you might make a mistake um uh in talking. And if you explore so
Hmm.
much with the English language, or any language, but let's say the English language, and you break the bounds and you're not normal, you could run into problems of trying to get back to the ranch.
Yeah.
um you can see some of his interviews where he does little things like that. He's literally imparting musical wisdom and life wisdom in his from his
Hmm.
experience in a humble way, but a creative way. And it's really, 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 really a grabber for me, attention grabber. The music on his own, he really goes into like this song and dance type thing. That's a little bit too. I'm not, the person outweighs the music that he writes, in my opinion, but that's my criteria.
Well,
When it mixes with other works like Brian Wilson, it becomes magic.
right.
He's a genius, though. Like, he really does awesome arrangements.
Hmm.
He arranged Bare Necessities, the original,
Hmm.
from the Jungle Book.
The Jungle Book. Yeah.
He's the one that did the arrangement musical score for that,
Uh-huh.
like the song that we hear in the
Yeah.
cartoon or
Look
whatnot.
for the bare necessities,
Yeah,
the simple bare necessities.
yeah. He's sort
Forget
of,
about your worries and your stress. Yeah.
that's his world. Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. That's his world. And according to what he said, he's interested in Americana,
Hmm.
but he's also interested in world music. But in any
Well,
event, and I feel like,
but you never know where somebody's going to go in that kind of a thing because, like, you look at Don Henley, Glenn Fry, Randy Meisner. Look at all the original Eagles. People think, oh, well, these are a bunch of rock kids from California. They talk about the West all the time. They're all Detroit boys. They were all born and raised in Detroit. J.D. Souther was too, but he got hooked on folk and country from a young age. And as Glenn Fry said, he took this Detroit boy and turned him into a country music fan, and he shaped the music that the Eagles played and still continue to play. You know, they started out as Linda Ronstadt's backup band early on, and then kind of went off on their own and did their thing. But that never really left them his influence. I mean, he co-wrote with Glenn Fry. He wrote "Best of My Love," Victim of Love, New Kid in Town, Heartache Tonight, How Long, and that's just with the Eagles. He wrote for a number of people, but he had one song that got popular, and that's You're Only Lonely. And that was a hit in like 79. It became a hit. And then he co-wrote with a friend, James Taylor, Her Town. Used to be your town too, and sang the duet with him. He's written for a number of different performers, but he's only known for that one song, You're Only Lonely. And if you didn't know that was him, you would swear it was the Eagles. That's how much the Eagles followed him, followed his lead.
Yeah, there's people in the background that often, unless you're a connoisseur beyond the surface, there's people that are left unattended
Mm-hmm.
to. But let me wrap up this weird thing that I was saying
Oh,
between
okay. I'm sorry.
music. No, no, no. I just wanted to go back to it because I want to tie it in. So this Van Dyke Parks musician arranger risks, in my opinion. Maybe for him it's not a risk because he's quite um,
Mm-hmm.
he does it when in conversation, but he's always at the edge of saying something creatively interesting, just like his lyric writing for songs, just like his musical arrangements. There's
Mm-hmm.
always something on the edge of, wow, that's, are you sure you want to risk that?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he doesn't have the appearance that would go with the mainstream, the cool rock or this or that. Um, Especially now, he's an older gentleman, like in his
Mm-hmm.
80s. So, but back then he was a smaller guy, and there's plenty of small musicians. But the point is that
Mm-hmm.
background, and yet he pushes the envelope. Um, but there's a sense that's either self-inflicted or a cue taken from society at large.
Mm-hmm.
That when the doors open, leading to a hall with people walking in one direction, that like the buffalo off the cliff going in the opposite direction
Mm-hmm.
or taking a route different than the buffaloes heading out the cliff is frowned upon, or there's a pushback, or there's a tamping down of such behavior when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
anything from music to lyric writing. I'm not complaining because I'm going to attach it but I'm going to give it as an example. I recognize that that's just how life is,
Mm-hmm.
and not everybody can have a hit record. Like a friend of mine
Sure.
said when I was complaining about the um, Rolling Stones, he said, "Well, you're complaining about Rolling Stones, but you don't have a gold record, do you? You don't even have a wooden record." Like, he did
Mm-hmm.
that, um, which is true. Not
Yeah.
that I have a wooden record. I don't. I
But you
don't.
still have an opinion. You know what you like and what you don't.
Well, that's true. But here's the bit. I've written many songs. Not that I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied with very few. Well, I'm okay with very few of them, because I could improve on so many others. I haven't touched them in a while because it's not this time for me to even touch or deal with that. Um, but the amount of energy, effort, thinking that goes into writing songs, recording songs, choosing which chords to play, correcting for mistakes, allowing mistakes to be left in because either that's as good as you're going to get it, you think in your mind, or you have to do something else because if not, you'll forget that something else you have to do in order to clean this up.
Mhm.
The
Or
process,
maybe it just sounds good.
the process of mixing the whole thing, like
Hmm.
all those skills and all that, and then the end result is this thing. that
Hmm.
sits there unknown, kind of like YouTube videos, making YouTube videos,
Yeah.
or anything else in life for that matter.
Yeah.
Um, you walk the weird or the odd or the slightly off at your own peril, but you do so because you're following your muse in this life. But there's no expect expectation of compensation that should go along with it,
Well, yeah.
because it's in itself the learning and exploring and insight so when these songs, so just to wrap this up, so the difference that you mentioned, that I mentioned, when we refer to a song as soulless as opposed to one that has deep meaning and profound insight and whatnot, and just a good vibe, all these things, it seems like there's something that bleeds out of the sweat of a song that was done with little golden nuggets in there, Easter eggs and such, and you pick up on as a listener. They say, "Man, there's something special going." Like they're really stabbing at it.
Hmm.
Whereas the other one is this metal, cold surface of a thing.
Processed and plastic.
Yeah. So in order to do anything,
Mhm.
many times you have to follow the weird path, the strange, the left on the wayside.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean by certain tunes interrupted certain genres and certain eras. Um, and what I mean by soulless is not necessarily the lyrical content. The lyrics may have a lot of depth. The lyrics may have a lot of meaning and a lot of impact. But by the time the musical production is done, you have stripped a lot of the humanity out of it because everything has been so processed to within an inch of its life to make everything absolutely perfect. You've stripped away the humanity because humanity is far from perfect,
Yeah.
you know? Um, and I'm talking about more than just auto tune and more than just pitch correction. They have their place, but not on every single note. And that's why it's hard to connect to. For me, I can't connect to modern music because to me, there's no humanity in it. Now, you're a musician, you have performed in small venues, and that used to be where you could go to hear real humanity sing and play and perform. And there were several music venues around where you know there was going to be a band performing on the weekend that you could go, chill out, and listen and watch a show. Is there anything like that anymore? You've played in venues like that, and you've watched other performers in venues like that. You're in one of the hotbeds of of the American music scene. The number of people that go to Miami to record is just, I mean, it's astronomical. The number is just astronomical. Can you think of any music venues like that where you can still go and sit down at a table and order a drink or two and watch a band perform?
I don't know, because I am so regional
Hmm.
within Miami that just to get from A to B now, it's like, why
Hmm.
bother?
Yeah.
It's like, really, why bother? So I don't know, but there used to be a place called Howl at the Moon
Hmm.
in the Coconut Grove area,
Hmm.
and I remember walking in with either friends or a girlfriend. I did so various times, so I don't remember the specific, but I remember that one time that I went first, I just can't remember who I went with. And what it was here in Miami, to the top extreme slant of the term, a bar
Hmm.
in the theme of American bar, full of Cubans, but just the decor and the vibe and the whole
Hmm.
Cubans and other people, but
Yeah, I get it.
they're an overwhelming. We're in Miami. Um, I walked in, and dude, it was two pianos in the
Hmm.
round facing each other,
Yeah.
and two musicians with no other instrumentation
Hmm.
playing songs screamed out by the crowd,
Hmm.
and they would take turns and join in together.
Hmm.
And dude, that was an experience. I don't even know if that place exists anymore, but
Hmm.
between that and the beer and the crowd and the
Hmm.
music, really honky tonking it,
Yeah.
rock and rolling it,
Hmm.
uh,
But
playing all the goodies.
they weren't even singing. The crowd was.
Yeah, the crowd would sing. They would. It was so acoustic and loud, but in the acoustic sense that it was almost like theater, but for Americana music. You know how when you're
See,
in a
now that's
theater,
killer. Hmm.
oh yeah, dude, you know how the sound reverberates in a
Hmm.
special way when it's like a
Hmm.
music hall or something like that,
Yep.
as opposed to an electronic guitar amplified thing.
Right.
It was. See, I almost cursed. It was that bad to the bone. Yeah,
Yeah. I I love stuff like that. I love and I love the special surprises. When I was stationed at Fort Campbell before I met Linda, about a year before I met Linda, as a matter of fact, me and another guy in my unit, we would go into town to these two bars, and there was always a band playing at one or the other. And you could tell, you just drive by the parking lot, and if there weren't a lot of cars there, you know, okay, they're not here. And you go to the other place, and the parking lot would be packed. You'd park, you know, 3, 4 places away and walk, you know, 2 blocks to get back to the joint and walk in, and there was a band playing. And usually it was a little, you know, local band, pretty good, but definitely not a, you know, signed by any record label or anything like that. But they were a local band, a jam band, and they had a good time, and we had a good time, and everything was great. But there were other times you would walk in. We walked in one night, and Black Oak, Arkansas was playing. And it's like, yeah, that's Jim Dandy, the whole thing. This is Black Oak, Arkansas. Another time we went in, and it was one of the versions of Molly Hatchet was playing in this little beer bar in Clarksville, Tennessee. You know, another time we went in, and it was Head East in this little beer bar in Clarksville, Tennessee that nobody's ever heard of. So you never knew what you were going to walk into. It was almost always something good, even if it was just a little band, a little local band. But it was a lot of fun because it was raw. These guys brought their own amps from home, they brought their own guitars from home. They didn't have roadies. One of them, if they were lucky, one of them had a van to be able to haul things in. There was a drum kit up on the stage, so they didn't have to bring everything. But if the drummer had specific toms he liked, or a cymbal setup that he wanted, he'd bring his own with him. And they would set up and they'd jam for 2, 3 hours, 4 hours throughout the night. Then, when they're done with their set, tear everything down and go home. It was just a place you could go to hear real music performed by real people in real time. There
yeah.
wasn't any processing. Hell, half the time the place was so small the singer didn't need a microphone. If you were up close to the stage, you heard every damn word, you know? And it could be a 5 piece group this time, and it could be one dude with an acoustic guitar next time, you know? Maybe a drummer to keep time.
So, in the early Here's a strange one. In the early 2000s,
Hmm.
I had left city life for Everglades work,
Hmm.
and I became an Everglades tour guide,
Yeah.
driving airboats and such. Every day in the morning, I would get in the car and drive out west along this solitary road, which is the Tamiami Trail,
Hmm.
heading towards where pine trees started to jot the landscape on each side, and there was nothing else until eventually you ended up at this place, which was the crossroads in our woods, neck of the woods. On one corner on the left,
Hmm.
past the barbecue place called the Pit, about a few miles after, once you arrived at that crossroad, on your left hand side was a gas station, which was called um, Dade. I forget now, man. Dade Corners, I think it's
Hmm.
called Dade Corners, where truckers would stop, and all sorts of different types of people. Yeah, you see all sorts of type of people there in the middle of nowhere, coming from all sorts of different places.
Yeah.
Um, on the opposite side, across the road, was the casino, towering thing in the middle of the swamps. You
Hmm.
just have to imagine it. And then I'd keep going straight down another X amount of miles to my place of work, where I'd worked the whole day up until
Hmm.
6 o'clock. And working out there, I met people that I wouldn't have rubbed elbows with in Miami.
Hmm.
Um, of non, what I would call not your typical Miami person, where
Hmm.
there's a Hispanic leaning in one direction or the other. These people were Anglo, more or less oriented, or any combination of that, but nothing to do with the broader Cuban community. So it
Oh
was a
yeah.
different, it was a different world.
Hmm.
And after work, sometimes, because I did that for on and off for 10 years, working out there. So, so it was a world. It was a world that I experienced. Because there's different topics, there's different ways of looking at life.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
it, and some of it is a lot of it is insightful and deep, and some of it is like, what the hell. But in
Yeah.
any event, many times, or on occasion, one guy would say, "Hey, why don't we all go hit the casino and eat that special, um, surf and turf, because they had a 5.99 surf and turf
Hmm.
at the casino,
Yeah.
and we'd all jump in one or two vehicles, or I'd drive, or I go with them in any
Hmm.
combination, and we'd end up in the middle restaurant,
Hmm.
surrounded by machines. It was elevated
Hmm.
about 3 or 4 steps, and you'd walk up into this round area. There was a piano and a guy that would play piano, and people would sit and eat this amazing 5.99 meal of steak and lobster.
Hmm.
And various times, my friends, coworkers, would say, "Eloy, go sing one, Eloy." Because one of the first things I did in natural conversation was say, "Oh, I write and record music." And I said, "Well, bring us something." And they would put the tape in the house speaker at my job,
Yeah. No
and I'd be
pressure.
listening to myself and stuff. So the word there was that, I played and whatnot, this and that. So when we were at the casino eating, they would say,
Hmm.
"Eloy," they'd tell the piano man, "Hey, get him up to sing one." And like, it's not the right setting
Yeah.
for what I do, but I would
Hmm.
indulge and do it.
Hmm.
I get up in front of a crowd that's eating, get this, surrounded by machines, casino
Eating
machines,
dinner.
eating dinner in an elevated platform
Hmm.
restaurant area, open air, inside that thing, smoke hovering everywhere, a piano, and I'd get up in a uniform I looked like a wildlife preserve guy
Park Ranger. Mr. Ranger.
with a big beard like that.
Uh,
And then I'd say to the guy, "Okay, do you know this song? Sure, okay." And then on piano, I would I would perform what we could only say is the equivalent of a what is it? A Frank Sinatra slash Steve Dean Martin type thing. It's like when the shark bites with its teeth sear. I'd be singing that with just a piano backup,
Mhm,
dressed like that,
mhm,
and everybody there and stuff. And they at the end they would clap
mhm,
just appropriately with the whole thing,
mhm,
and I'd walk back, but I almost feeling like I did it just to accommodate, but at the same time I'm like, oh gosh, this is
mhm.
such a weird. I mean, maybe
Cringy. Yeah.
yeah, if you're in a suit and in a
Mhm.
different situation and a different concept and this and that, but it was such an odd, surrealistic. You'd have to just picture. I guess maybe you can picture it. It's for very weird, but I literally sang "When the Shark Bites," and so it's just funny
Mac
as
the
hell.
knife in the casino restaurant. That's funny.
Very weird alternate universe
Yeah.
type of thing. Something that would have only happened if I obviously made the decisions I did to go out and work someplace that was away from what I was familiar with
Yeah.
before. Um, and I
I
gained a
would.
lot of insight, dude. A lot of insight living and working there because I did also would stay there
Hmm,
a lot, just overnight. It was, I mean,
mhm.
an adventure.
Well, you've got a lot more guts than I do to get up in front of people and sing, but you can sing, so that's one advantage you have.
No, not.
I
I mean, I can wing it.
but I can't hold a note. I'm tone deaf as heck. Now Linda says I have a good voice. I don't think I do. But in my drinking days, we went over to it was her old platoon sergeant in Georgia. We went over to his house for a party he was having. I don't even remember what the party was for, but he was a musician. His son was a musician. They had friends over there that were musicians. And I mean, you're talking several guitar players, and drums, the whole damn thing. And various people would get up and he tried to get people to sing and try to get people to sing. Well, finally, after several hours and a lot of liquid courage, they were singing Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater. And nobody could remember the third verse. And Mark, you know it? Yeah, I know it. Well, get up here and do it. No, 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 no. Come on, get up here and do it. No, 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 no. And finally they talked me into it. And I did. I got up and I did it. And I felt about that damn tall the whole time because people were coming. I mean, her platoon sergeant got up out of the living room from another room and came flying in to see who was singing. And he just stood there and he shook his head and he turned around and he walked away, but you could tell he didn't go very far. He just kind of stepped around the corner because I'm standing there looking at him, with eyes bugging out, like, oh crap, is he gonna boot us out of here now? But I kept going and I sang it. And he came back after I was done and he was pissed at me, not because I got up and sang, but because I waited so long and didn't get up and sing earlier. He's like, what else do you know? I'm like, oh, I don't know. What do you know locomotive breath, Jeff Rotel? Yeah. Well, let's do it. Really? Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so I did it. And that's the only time I ever sang in front of people. And it was only like 30, 40 people at a party. But
It's a tough one, dude. It is a tough one, dude. It is a tough
he
one
was
because
he was mad at me for the duration, for as long as we stayed there. And Linda's reminding me, it was her going away party when we left Georgia and went to Hawaii. And he was mad at me for the rest of the time we were there because I wouldn't get up and sing anymore.
it's a tough
Because I
one.
I don't think I have a voice. I don't like the sound of my voice, so I sing when I'm walking around here, but I don't sing in front of people.
Another thing about this type of situation is that with singing and other things, writing music or anything that one does, I feel that it's very true. And I've always had a little bit of a pet peeve in the way of thinking about this for a long time,
Hmm.
really long time, like going back to my teenage years.
Hmm.
I felt that it was a truism, but you have to believe. You have to believe as if it were so. Believe that what in the magic of what you're doing or what you're representing or you're feeling or you're writing down or you're believe. And the second part of that is that judgment calls, because that's really what it's about. You're
Hmm.
putting yourself out and people are
Yeah,
prepared to judge you
right.
at the drop of a dime.
Yeah.
Um and they will.
Hmm.
And many will do so vocally and others
Yeah,
will
yeah.
do so
By throwing
internally.
shit.
No, some will do it internally, but the thing key here is that regardless, you're you're stepping up and
Hmm.
proceeding, and your ability as a human being to think and observe, follow
Hmm.
patterns and behaviors and so on,
Yeah,
you know that by hook or crook, you are basically putting yourself out there, and the condition is that by doing so, you will be judged. And
yeah.
so that concept is a scary one. And
And I couldn't get past that.
well, for a while now, so Billy Joel, what's
Hmm.
happened to me in this thing, in this situation with, I've not really, I've made it, I've, I've put stuff, old clips of me and friends
Hmm.
out there,
Hmm.
but I've not done anything current
Hmm.
because the mojo
Yeah.
is required.
Yeah,
Um,
you have to be in that headspace to do it.
you have to think that there's something you have to say, either to yourself, to others, um, and a wanting. But here's the
Hmm.
thing: Billy Joel, in his River of Dreams album, which came out sometime in the early '90s,
Yeah, that's been a while back.
had one song that I always remember that I think is a brilliant saying for what this all is. Especially if you have done something in the past and no longer do it,
Hmm.
and it's called Last Words, something to that effect.
Hmm.
And in the lyric he says, "These are the last words I have to say. um there might be some other words some other day, some other day." And he goes on to explain, but if you listen to the song and what he's saying in that album, in that song,
Hmm.
um in that particular song, he's saying that, hey, what I'm this song that I'm singing and what I'm saying, I'm basically saying that's about it. That's all I gotta say.
Hmm.
Maybe one day in the future there will be a need. If you listen to the lyrics of that song and the song itself, it's a beautiful song. Um, it's so freaking awesome. In any event, he has not really he's performed, but
Hmm.
sat and written anything rock and roll wise,
Hmm.
he's not done. I think recently he's collaborating with someone, I think,
Hmm.
but all those years after, that's what I call poetic.
Yeah.
Billy Joel, and I think that that was pertinent to what we're saying.
Yeah, he is one of the quintessential songwriter. He's a songwriter and a performer's performer. I don't think the man has done a bad song. And he's got such an eclectic style and eclectic uh, catalog of music that if you look at his big hits, none of them sound the same. They don't sound the same. They're as different as night and day to each other. You May Be Right sounds completely different from The Longest Time.
Who do you think he wrote? Who do you think was the inspiration for You May Be Right?
Himself, wasn't it?
It's marked. It's etched in the vibe of the song and style of the song. If you had to pick a song, if you had to pick a band
Hmm.
that closely resembles the sound of It May Be Right, that you can actually even close your eyes and slightly fool yourself. And I'm asking this to you and to the people out there.
I thought he
Which,
wrote it about himself.
well, okay, I get that, but now knowing that he had an inspiration,
Mm-mm.
according to myself
Mm-hmm.
and according to what I've read,
Mm-hmm.
and not just recently, I've known,
Mm-hmm.
what band, if you think of the tone and style and vibe of that, and his voice and just the whole number, if you had to pick a band to attach it to that he would have been inspired by,
It sounds like a couple. It's almost Rolling Stones esque.
you got it.
Um,
You
but
got it, Fu Manchu.
but there's a few others in there as well.
No, but you answered
But
it.
okay, all right.
It is completely inspired from him.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's him,
Sure.
but his vibe.
Mm-hmm.
He said my inspiration, Rolling Stones. And in fact, if
Mm-hmm.
you listen to the way he's and if you look at his video
Mm-hmm.
and the way he dances in it, he's basically saying this. He's basically saying this is a tribute to the Rolling Stones.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Stones had a brief stint where they were in New York for quite some time, and I know that he got to know a couple of them, but I didn't know that that song was inspired by them.
Oh, he's got a few of them that are like
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
because
but
if you
he changes up his style so often, and that's one of the things about him that makes him so different and so special. Because, like I said, if you listen to any of his hits, they don't sound like one another. They sound like they were performed by different bands. There isn't. I mean, it's kind of sort of like Steely Dan. You can't put them in a box.
well,
You can't
Steely
put.
Dan is a world on its own. But I get
Yes,
your point. I
but
get your point.
yeah, you can't put him in. You can't say that Billy Joel is rock. You can't say he's adult contemporary. You can't say he's a balladeer. You can't say he's doo-wop because he's all of those things and so many more. It's the same as Steely Dan. What genre is Steely Dan? Well, Steely Dan's genre is Steely Dan, and that's all you can say. That you got to go beyond jazz fusion. You got to go beyond jazz. You got to go beyond blues. You got to do several things all at once. So the only box you could put Steely Dan is one that's marked Steely Dan, and that's it.
So growing up here
Hmm.
and having musician friends
Hmm.
that played in different bands,
Yeah.
um, a few things. One was that there was a slight disrespect. I want to call it disrespect, but it was maybe a dismissal
Hmm.
or a let's not bother with that, which I found that Buffalo heading in one direction and I was heading in
Hmm.
the other. They dismissed the blues
Hmm.
as this side of
Old people's music.
passe, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I really, I don't want to say I resented it, but I had a little bit of, let's call it slightly not happy with that
Yeah.
attitude because I don't understand why people couldn't understand my friends. I don't understand why they couldn't understand the significance of the blues and American roots music. I knew it from the beginning, Mark.
Hmm.
Well, from when I began my journey, I, I could see it, I could identify it, I could feel it.
Hmm.
Why
Well,
couldn't they?
that's because you became a student of the music and you studied the music and you bought the documentaries and you saw who the people you looked up to, you saw who they looked up to, you saw
Yeah.
their inspirations. So you studied the music. You didn't just play it.
The contemporary music of the time in the
Hmm.
80s and 90s was a derivative
Hmm.
of the good old stuff.
Yeah. And
Why couldn't
oftentimes it was a direct remake of the good old stuff.
well why did they were so into the alternative
Hmm.
slash what was that um
New
uh
wave, new
new
age.
wave, which was fine. I enjoyed the hell out of it too, but dudes, don't you see? No. Oh, Eloy, the blues again. Eloy with the blues again. Eloy with the blues again. I heard that. I heard that. Eloy with the blues again. Eloy. So I felt like a freaking third wheel many times
You weren't a fit for that band.
trying to fit in something that. So look, without soul,
Hmm.
my criteria.
Yeah.
Without soul, it's not satisfying.
Yeah.
And in the 20th century, here on this side of the Atlantic, here on this ground, you can't get away from the blues.
No.
It can't happen. And if you try to distance it, fine, but you will get that plastic stuff you were talking, the way you were explaining it.
Hmm.
Inevitably, it will arrive at that, and that's fine. You can have that
Hmm. If
because
that's what,
that's another expression. But please
yep.
acknowledge the roots music. Acknowledge it because that is the stuff of stories. Because our lives are not a steel
Hmm.
hallway. Our lives are a hallway that has turns in it and different rooms, and that's the blues.
Hmm.
Not one steel or um, stainless steel clean hallway. And no, that's not where stories occur. It could.
It may be where some stories occur, but it's not the end all and be all because different influences influence differently.
Right.
And there, without blues, there is no rock. There isn't any rock. I mean, you only have to go back to the format. You only have to, you know, it all goes back to those roots.
Anyways, to wrap up my little
Hmm.
foray into my I did have many friends that were super talented and
Hmm.
skilled, but something did not allow for them, us, me, all of us, to agree to it and to put forth our best effort in unison,
Hmm.
because we could have produced as individuals in a group
Hmm.
insane stuff. And I'm not saying that as like I'm not trying to pander to a future that could have been,
Hmm.
although it does sound like that. I'm just trying to say that there was potential in these people
Hmm.
of the most excellent quality, but what inhibited them to one degree was the natural course of life. You know how it is. But
Yeah. Closed
also,
mindedness.
well, yeah, we live our lives, and that's how it is. And sometimes it's better to go to a movie than do something else, but also the belief part.
That's what I mean. Closed mindedness.
If you don't believe within
Hmm.
that we're going to create magic, it may not be literal magic, but it could be.
Hmm.
Maybe it is. It's on the verge of. But you have to believe. And by the way, you have to believe in your buddies.
Hmm.
You have to believe in your. So when I would look at my buddies, even then, especially, I saw in them the magic and potential of awesomeness.
Hmm.
I did. So let's work together, guys. But the problem is that we were growing up,
Yeah.
and people like the Beatles.
Hmm.
I'm not even. I was gonna add the Stones as a what do you call it, a peace offering, but I guess I did already. But people like the Beatles, and all these other groups we've talked about were very very young, our age then in our Miami scenario,
Hmm.
and they managed to figure it out and work with each other and created the music and magic that we all are lucky to have because they decided to forego, even though selfishness is rampant, as we see in the Vanity Fairs and this and that, but they decided at a young age, to the degree that they did and the success that they had, to forego and believe, and look what they got.
And
And that, go ahead.
they wanted it. They had the drive to do it.
You have to believe,
Hmm.
and there's no difference between, there is plenty of differences, but there's no difference in this key way. No matter, like you, if you so desire and so choose it,
Hmm.
there is no difference at the level of creating magic, in my opinion. In my opinion, you yourself, you, let's say,
Hmm.
back then, let's say, and you were messing about with whatever instrument, because we're
Hmm.
talking about music, and you decided, no, this is what I'm gonna make magic.
Yeah. This is
In
what
my
I want to do. Yeah.
in my opinion, and to whatever degree, but my opinion is that the decision in your part, the belief in your part, you, Mark Lindsay, let's say,
Hmm.
or any number of people, once you have decided to open a door of magic, of belief
Hmm.
that you will create, I think that that is available to all people, but you have to have
Yes,
mojo
I
pop.
agree. I agree. You have to want it and you have to pursue it. And you have to have the strong desire to and the drive to not let anything stand in your way. If you want to master an instrument, you have to want to dedicate to it because it's not going to happen by osmosis overnight.
Right.
You have to want it. You have to want it more than you want to breathe. And you have to work for it. I firmly agree with you 100%. When I was singing that evening, I did not enjoy it. I did it because, I'd been drinking. I figured, what the hell? But the experience, I didn't enjoy it. And I felt a massive case of imposter syndrome that I shouldn't be doing this.
It's nerve
I
wracking, actually.
I did it. I finished it, and he talked me into one more song. I did that one, and then I never did it again. I didn't enjoy it. There was nothing. It wasn't the like in the movies where this sudden light bulb went off in my head, and I decided, well, they liked it. I'm going to be a singer, and no, that never happened to me. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it. I did it, and I wanted it to go away. I wanted it to be behind me.
It's nerve wracking, dude.
You know, yeah. But see, I don't normally have a problem. I'll tell a joke in front of a crowd. I'll act like an idiot in front of a crowd. Good grief, I get on a camera every week and make mistakes left, right, and center. I have no problem embarrassing myself in front of a crowd. But when it comes to singing, I don't want to do it. I really don't. I'm big time intimidated by it. I'm not good at it. And I just don't want to subject people to that kind of crap. Like I say, I know I can't sing. I don't feel the need to prove it in public. And that's as far as I go. You know, I got no enjoyment out of it, so I'm not going to pursue it.
I don't write much
Hmm.
or at all anymore. Barely. I did a clip of like a 3 second clip of
Hmm.
me just playing around with the
Noodling,
guitar, huh?
noodling on the porch.
Just noodling on the porch,
Hmm.
um, just to keep up with some sort of
Yeah.
potential future decision to maybe
Hmm.
consider writing something to self photograph an image of
Well,
myself as a potential of possible future mojo if it does come around.
well,
So I do those every now and then.
and sometimes it just feels good.
But well, no, that's actually why I did it.
Hmm.
Literally what I just said. I did it
Hmm.
to take a snapshot video
Hmm.
wise to self remind myself of you could possibly do that if
Hmm.
the light bulb, if the switch is flipped and
Hmm.
the mojo comes gushing through,
Yeah.
and you get that inspiration. But um, that I've not done so, written a proper song anymore, or even concentrated in such things because I've realized too many things that may or may not be pertinent,
Hmm.
but that prevent me from saying the things that I want to say in the music world. I have to believe, and currently that is not accessible.
Yeah.
And so that's just life.
Yeah.
But at the most basic level, regardless, whatever we do, I mean, it's been my life
Hmm.
for most of my life until recently, the last since 2018. Now with the DNA thing, and but the DNA thing is not DNA thing; it's actually genealogy thing, and it's telling the story of family members, and so that is my second phase. But it's all about telling stories anyhow.
Hmm.
If I don't record the stories of my family, nobody's gonna do it
Hmm. That's
that
true.
I'm aware of. So I'm doing it
Hmm.
because I wouldn't be here without them, and they did provide to me the ability to even pick up a guitar or have a guitar
Hmm.
or a comic book or food on on the table, or l- leave me with such. I could have been treated rotten
Hmm.
as a kid and left with scars,
Hmm.
and they did everything they could to allow me to be my own individual person and think what the hell I wanted to think, and yet provided the conditions necessary for me to survive up until my adult years.
Yeah.
So because of that, this is my important phase now.
Yeah. That's
And
where
so,
your focus has to be.
right, and I'm doing it, and it's self gratifying too because I'm also, so there's all these things. But returning to the music, you need to believe, dude,
Hmm.
if you want to perform it and
Yeah.
or sing it or whatnot.
Yeah.
And that's the Billy Joel connection too. He said, "Hey, I've said all that I've had to say.
Yeah.
That's why this song took so long to write.
Yeah.
There might be other words some other day. Ain't that the story of my life?" And so, everything is as it should be, even though we're dissatisfied with certain results. Maybe yes, maybe no.
Yeah.
But this
And
is go
but
ahead.
we're always going to be our sharpest critics, so we might think something is not finished, but maybe it is. It just depends, you know. Jim Dockrell said, I don't like my singing either. My dad used to tell me I had a good voice for cooling soup. I'm not going to pretend to understand that, Jim, but okay. A good voice for cooling soup.
Um,
I don't know where to go with that. How do you?
how do I connect that? Let me see if I can connect that in my mind. So, his dad used to say, "Son, you have a voice for cooling soup." So the way you cool soup is by blowing on it.
Yeah,
So that means that his singing blows. Would that
yeah.
be the
Well,
most accurate
I, I
roundabout getting there?
I don't know, Jim. You'll have to enlighten us because I'm totally missing that. But
That's how I worked it out. I could be totally wrong, but
yeah,
cooling soup, you blow. So if your voice is good for cooling soup, that means you blow.
okay. Pretty close, Eloy. Unless his dad was one of those people that slurped it out of the spoon and hoped it cooled on the way in which case your voice sucks.
Yeah. Well, let's not emphasize the let's
You
not
know.
emphasize the well, here's the thing. Um he would
Oh,
give me
okay.
something the chills. Oh, okay.
It would give something the chills. Okay, all right, all right. Now that makes sense. Now knowing that backstory, that makes sense. Okay.
Well, cooling soup, you don't cool. See, I'm not going to argue the point, but I think that I rationalized it, and I
Hmm.
appreciate you saying pretty close because it is pretty close. But in my reasoning, I think that my explanation kind of because the thing is, you don't chill. I mean, do you chill soup or you cool it?
Yeah.
You
Well.
cool by blowing on it. You cool, but chilling is
Hmm.
this side of refrigeration,
Yeah.
um, not blowing on it
Or
unless
you
you
chill it in the refrigerator.
or you
Yeah.
chill.
I think at the end of the day, Jim's right. It was not. It wasn't a compliment.
Um,
Yeah, I kind of gathered that part,
But
but
but then again, I'm sorry. Then again, you could also say the old argument, which we all know.
mm,
Um, excuse me, there's Bob Dylan.
mm,
Excuse me, there's
Chris Christopherson.
yeah, but for some reason I can't get I can't get past Chris Christopherson. And not for any physical gyrating stuff, more so the vocals.
He's an excellent songwriter, but just my opinion, I wish he would have left it at that because the guy cannot sing.
Dylan is crazy, but
But
his
Dylan can
lyrics,
sing what he wants to.
it's just that he doesn't want to.
Well, you only have to listen to Lay Lady Lay. He proved it in that song. That is a good song. And the vocal in that song is good. It really sounds good.
I
But
like
then
his
you contrast that with like a Rolling Stone, and it's like he hits notes that don't exist.
I don't know what happened to Bob Dylan between the first two albums and when he went electric, but
I don't either.
his voices on those two albums
Hmm.
were completely high bar to me,
Well,
on point. If you're a country guy, you
mhm.
sing like Bob Dylan in those two first albums, and there's no difference.
Well, see, Bob
After
Dylan, he was a folk singer. And then he decided to try to kind of get a little bit to inject some electricity into folk and went a little bit in a different direction because he didn't like the direction folk was going.
finish these lyrics.
Mhm.
Once upon a time, I threw the bums a dime.
Mm.
I don't even know if I said that in the right order. Once upon a time, I threw the bums a dime. Something in my prime. Oh crap! Can you do it from memory?
Are you trying to do Rolling Stone like a Rolling Stone?
Yeah. Once upon a time,
You look
I
so
threw the bums.
fine. You do the
Yeah.
dime.
You
You,
look
and then you, yeah.
okay. So once upon a time, you look so fine. You threw the bums a dime in your prime, didn't you?
Hmm.
People call, say beware doll. They thought you was all something used to it.
Forgetting you. Yeah. Anyway,
No,
but
but
yeah, it. You didn't need to have a 4 octave range and hit every note pitch perfect. for that kind of a tune. Same thing with Subterranean Homesick Blues. Johnny's in the basement mixing up the medicine. I'm on the pavement working for the. Think about the government. Man in a trench coat. You don't have to hit that every note perfect for that.
He's rapping practically.
For the most part, yeah. And it's because it's coming so fast, you're not going to get all rangy in that. You're just going to try to keep up with the rhythm because it's a pretty fast tempo. And there's a lot of things to say in there, you know.
Lay, lady, lay. How many times is he gonna have that lady lay?
Well, you know,
Lay,
he
lady,
better
lay.
cross his big brass bed. But
He did he did sing it good, but um that's an example of someone that's completely relevant,
mhm,
but doing something odd. And in his books, like the biographies that they read about
mhm,
his and 2 volume thick books like this, I had both
mhm.
of them. Now they're sitting outside in my closet outside, and I think they've been chewed through. It's unfortunate, but I have no room here. Um, they explained that he purposely would just decide to change and he kept doing that,
Yeah,
and that's just simply what he does.
yeah. And one of the few songs that he doesn't change up is All Along the Watchtower. And that's because he decided that Jimmy's version was the way that song was supposed to be sung. So ever since he heard Jimmy's version of All Along the Watchtower, he performed it very similar. He didn't obviously didn't do a direct copy of it because that's not his style, but he set it to the same tempo and he did it in that style ever since every time. He decided that was the definitive version.
Jimi Hendrix was great.
But
There's
Dylan was another example of a fabulous songwriter who influenced so many people and so many people followed everything that he did, but he never garnered the commercial success that he should have gotten. I think in my opinion, there were millions of people that bought his records and everything, but you, other than maybe Knocking on Heaven's Door, Lay Lady Lay, you, maybe Rolling Stone, you don't turn on the radio and hear Bob Dylan's music.
so going back to Van Dyke Parks and
Hmm.
his philosophy.
Hmm.
He was asked, and I'm paraphrasing the whole thing, but this is the gist of it, more or
Hmm.
less. Errors introduced somehow because of human, fault.
Hmm.
Um, he was asked about him being a background guy as opposed to a front
Yeah.
type guy, rock idol
Hmm.
type guy. And he says to the interviewer that he says something along the lines, I never saw it as a bad thing. I always saw it as a good thing because
Hmm.
there's something special about anonymity.
Yeah.
And yet, having the avenue to pursue your interests in the field that you desire to do so and find golden nuggets. I'm paraphrasing this, but this is the gist, and find the golden nuggets along the way that inform and enrich your life. So he basically explained, and this is where he goes into, and this is why you may not, people out there may not like his music necessarily, but his to me his philosophy, ideology, lyrical powers, and music for that matter, but whatever, cannot be denied.
Yeah.
Not if you're gonna speak of Americana music, because he's speaking of basically sitting at the back porch and no one for a 30-mile radius in the foothills of where you live, you with your neighbor from around the way are sitting one afternoon and playing some sort of country song or blues song for that matter.
Hmm.
No one but the birds and the cows and the pigs and maybe mom in the kitchen back then. See, I'm being very modern to make that
Hmm.
difference. And dad cutting the freaking lawn, whatever,
Hmm.
is gonna listen to that. But you're doing it for yourself, and you're doing it for your enjoyment, and you're benefiting it in that performance in your backyard with your friend, or front porch with your friend or friends,
Hmm.
for the sake of it, and it belongs to the environment that you're with. That's Americana. That's Americana. And other things can be Americana too, but that's what this Van Dyke's Park was referring to when there's a self enrich. You do it for the sake
Yeah.
that you need to get it done, because it's in you to do so.
Yeah.
That's the key, and there's a richness in that.
Yeah.
And so that's what he was speaking. So there's something about anonymity, not getting your dues at a massive Jimmy Page level,
Right.
but still you're doing the magic for the sake of the magic. And
And
so he
other
speaks of that.
and maybe other people perform it. Maybe you perform it yourself. Another one is Delbert McClinton. He's very much the same way. He had one hit song. The guy has recorded 30 albums since 1972. His latest one was 2019. He still tours. He may be recording a new album. I don't know. But he's put out 30 albums, and he's had one song that hit number 8 in the 70s, and that was Giving It Up for Your Love. And you'll hear it occasionally still on the classic rock stations. It's kind of a quirky tune. It's not real wild guitars or anything, but he's out there doing it, and he's writing songs for other people perform them. They will make other. I mean, he's written songs for Bonnie Raitt. He's written music for. Um, oh, let's see who else here. Um, come on, I can't find the article now. But yeah, Bonnie Raitt, Tanya Tucker, John Hyatt. He's done all kinds of stuff. He's written a lot of music that's been put into movies and TV shows and what have you. But he's done, for God's sakes, 30 albums. And maybe 6 people will remember his name.
There's a lot.
But
Ray Cooter.
yeah, Ry Cooter is another one. This is the exact same way. But he does it for the love of the music.
Ray Cooter.
Hmm.
Or you're gonna say something? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Ry Cooter is an awesome guitarist,
Ray
amazing
Ray
guitarist.
Ray Cooter.
Hmm.
He's a strange one too, by the way. But
Hmm.
Ray Cooter, he has a story and a half. His story is
Hmm.
insane. Um, but I'll focus on this one little bit. You know, he's very grassroots music, right?
Hmm.
Like with railroad tracks and trains and
Yeah,
all
very
sorts.
Delta blues.
Yeah, he's got something that's very earthy.
Hmm.
And okay, back 20 years ago, he went to Cuba.
Hmm.
This is a big. The exile community is not too fond of these type of musicians that travel to
Yeah.
said country for due to X amount of political. But I'm gonna have to admit that what he produced over there,
Hmm.
he went and gathered local musicians, and he put them in a room, and he recorded traditional Cuban music of days gone by.
Hmm.
And dude, that earlier on we were talking about that room sound, that you
Hmm.
walk into that piano room,
Yeah,
and
that
the
reverberation and everything, that small venue reverb.
what he recorded, and the sound quality of his engineering,
Hmm.
and the reverberation of a man singing about his love in Spanish, with the piano bouncing off the wall in your headphones,
Hmm.
and the trumpets coming from one side, and you feel like you're in that room.
Yeah.
um he created magic, dude. But he created magic,
Yeah.
and that we could call that Cuban roots music to a
Hmm.
T. It's the Cuban. equivalent of what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Very special, very magical. But anyways, Ry Cooder is one of those roots music type guys
Yeah.
that's kind of in the background, but kicks freaking ass.
Well, if you've ever seen the movie Crossroads with Joe Seneca, Ralph Macchio,
Mhm.
and a guest appearance by Steve Vai, Ry Cooder played all of Ralph Macchio's blues guitar parts. There was another guitarist who played all the classical parts, but Ry Cooder played all of the blues that was not played by Steve Vai. And he showed Macchio kind of how to almost sort of match it on the fretboard. And Macchio didn't get it all right, but that was not him playing the guitar. It was all Ry Cooder.
Ry Cooder also in the 60s, early
Mm-hmm.
70s
Yeah.
was phoned up by Frank Zappa. By the way, I'm paraphrasing the story and some little details may be off,
Mm-hmm.
but the gist of it is there. It could be cleared up but he was phoned by Frank Zappa
Mm-hmm.
or someone there. Frank Zappa was involved. And the music studio, and they said, "We need to contract you. We need you to go out and record." What was that band that was a band from the desert and they were really weird? Associated with Frank Zappa, but not in the same band.
Um, oh, hell. I can't let me look it up. I can't.
Yeah,
I
please.
remember.
I think we're thinking of the same one probably, and it's not the Mothers of Invention I'm thinking of.
No. Um, man.
I'm gonna kick myself in the rear for not knowing it.
Mm,
They did Trout Mask Replica. They did.
yeah. Um, you have mentioned them several times before. Captain Beefheart.
Damn it! See, that's where I kicked myself in the rear.
Mm-hmm.
Once you named it, I felt a boot. Boom.
Yep.
Um, Captain Beefheart. Okay, so Ry Cooder was sent to produce Captain Beefheart,
Mm-hmm.
and Ry Cooder is the epitome, according to what I've read, of organization, skill, thoughtfulness in recording and working music out. And Beefheart wanted to do anything but, and it turned into a huge nightmare. There's a story behind that. That if you go looking for it,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting as hell because of the conflicts in people's personalities trying
Mm-hmm.
to create music. In any event, whatever. But Ry Cooder is one of those people that I would say slightly off to the side, but very important in American history musically.
Yeah. I would put Lonnie Mack in there as well. Lonnie Mack was a major, major blues player
He's
in the
also, yeah,
50s and 60s. And in fact, Stevie Ray talked him into coming back, and he recorded an album in the 80s with Stevie Ray called
yeah.
Strike Like Lightning. And man, it's a good album. Very good album.
There's live performances of them, I believe.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Studio, I believe.
There are studio performances, and there are um,
Stage.
stage live performances by them, just trading licks back and forth. And the thing about it is, when you get two blues musicians together and they're trading licks back and forth, pretty soon one of them is going to start repeating things he's already played. He's going to fall into a groove and keep repeating over and over. And these two can go on for 10 minutes and never play the same thing twice and just go back and forth. And I will, oh man, that
Okay,
was Strike Light Lightning was an excellent album.
okay. Here's I'm gonna say a thing,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna ask you a question.
Okay. Then we need to think about landing the plane. It's been 2.5 hours.
Okay. So, give me the Beat Boys to thrill my soul. I want to get lost in your rock and roll.
Drift away.
Americana or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dobie Gray. Yes.
Powerful. Okay. My question is, damn it, give me one moment. Let me open the door. Let me open the door because my dog, I don't want him to.
Yeah. I get you. I get you. All right. Yep. I get you. Steely Dan's genre would fall into the category of music I like. Preach, brother. Preach. Steely Dan is one of the premier acts that is, I mean, one of the best acts that has ever existed.
Okay, my
That's all
question,
there is to it.
Mark Lindsay, my question
Mm-hmm.
is,
Eloy Escovedo.
it's a sign of. Beagle, are you serious? I'm sorry. Forgive me. It's okay. He only to, okay. I let him out and he did what he did. Okay, so my question. I just gave you a lyric and I
Mm-hmm.
asked you if it's Americana or not, and you said
Mm-hmm.
yes, and I agree with you. So that's why I said it because I wanted to see if we agreed on randomly,
Mm-hmm.
but of importance to you, if it filters up, from the catacombs of the brain. Can you give me an in response an Americana lyric um back?
From that same song or
No,
just any?
from the
Okay.
magic collective of your
Okay. Sitting in the evening sun. I'll be sitting till the evening's done. Watching the ships roll in and watch them roll away again.
very good.
I mean,
So can you give
chewing
me
on a piece of grass walking down the road. Tell me how long you gonna stay here, Joe?
give me
Some
give me
people
give
some
me an,
people say this town don't look good in snow, but you don't care. I know. You
um
know, like the pine trees whine in the winding road, I got a name. I carry it with me and sing it like my daddy did. I mean, just you name it. There are so many out there that just I don't know what it is.
I got a woman, feet in the hall, head in the kitchen, feet in the hall.
Hmm.
I call her Caledonia. Caledonia, Caledonia. What make your big feet, your wig hair? So I forget the second part of the lyric. That's blues. It's
Hmm.
such a weird, it's such a weird thing. BB King sang that
Hmm.
back in like early BB King, and like there's a.
Caledonia,
Oh, you remember it?
Caledonia.
He says, "I got something to the
What
effect."
makes your big head so hard?
Yeah, it's
That.
so crazy. It's so
Yep.
crazy. Yeah, so she's so tall or something like that, where her head's in the kitchen and her feet's in the hall, and
Yeah.
then just the whole thing. But that and what you said, obviously this is more jokey, but
Hmm.
these little sayings and these little images,
Hmm.
um, if you sit with them for decades, like I have and many other people, I'm not
Hmm.
saying, um, they start to weave into some sort of theme that you can't easily get rid of. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And they pop up at the least expected moment, and they act as little, almost like Buddhist temple sayings that direct you to summarize some sort of situation or difficulty, and
Hmm.
that's the beauty of it. But the context of the roots music in that, as opposed to some sort of plastic thing like you were talking about, is that,
It's a mood.
well, the contrast I want to say is that there's so much you can get out of my booty oh so big, grab another beer,
But
you know.
but you can do that and still be within the right. I'll give you a good example. My booty. Okay. You ever hear a song by Ruth Brown called "If I Can't Sell It, I'll Sit Down on It"?
Was it sit down on it? No, that's
No. Um, she opens the song. There's a little bit of an intro, a little
it's get
instrumental
down.
intro. She opens the song by saying, I run a secondhand furniture store. And I had a guy come in telling me that my prices were too high. And he wanted to buy a chair from me, but he wasn't offering me enough money. And I said, honey, if I can't sell it, I'm going to sit down on it. And she starts singing this song. And it's double entendre after double entendre. You know, because she explained it, she's talking about a chair. But you could swear she is singing about her booty just by the way she portrays. She turns the lyrics around and the double entendres come through. You know, it's lush and it's plush and it's silky smooth, you know, and all this other kind of stuff. It is that message. But we're talking about something that was done in, I can't remember if it was the late 40s or the 30s or the 50s, rather. And it was 1936. But it was, I mean, it was done. Oh, it's been done by several people. But it started in 1936. So it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. And it's heavy, heavy blues stuff. And my God, is it ever a fun tune?
It's not what you're saying. It's not. It's how you're saying it. It's a combination too, and within context.
Right.
I don't know about everybody else, and I know that it's self
Mm-hmm.
my my perception, but I can tell, and it's my perception, when something lacks that spirit, that
Mm-hmm.
and when something, whether it's a nice outcome story, a tragic story, or a fun story but with spirit,
Mm-hmm.
without it, um I could care. Like, last thing else, this will be the last thing, and it's actually ending it on a down note, but I want to make the distinction. Back in the day, I remember that there was these things called rave parties and
Yeah.
such, and I remember I went to one type of that. I
Mm-hmm.
forget if it was rave back then, but there was a name for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember walking into that club, and there were people with little light sticks
Yeah. Glow
or hula
sticks.
hoop
Yeah.
things or some weird thing like that.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime I went to a place like that, which was few and far between, or any club,
Mm-hmm.
unless it was something like the bar I told you about with the
Yeah.
pianos, I felt a strange detachment from
Fish out
the,
of.
yeah, from the environment. I felt
Mm-hmm.
like, but when I would go into a place like what we were talking about with the pianos and whatnot, something felt like home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's that feeling of home that's
Yeah.
part of this thing called Americana.
It's a
And
comfort. Yeah.
it's a comfort of something familiar, something that could have been told to you by your grandpa or grandma,
Even if you've never been there before,
even if you've never been there before,
you
because
you
you're
fit.
you fit because you're attached to it
Mm-hmm.
via the storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, and when I say Americana, I really mean the United States, but I also mean this side of the hemisphere, because the same can be said to our neighbors to the north and the south with
Mm-hmm.
their respective variations on the themes. I mentioned
Sure.
something about Cuba and their, because those things bled into the country in the respective. So we do have things like mariachis and such and
Mm-hmm.
this and that, and other, there, those are roots music type things
Mm-hmm.
that come along with it, the stories of the past and everything you just said exactly,
Yeah.
that connects us to it as if we belong. So there is something to, like, when I was in Mexico
Mm-hmm.
and I heard the mariachis, I feel something very natural, accessible to it,
Uh-huh.
friendly, welcoming, earthy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever sat next to or close to a mariachi.
I've seen them. Yeah. Do you get the same? Do you get the same feeling if you listen to Puerto Rican salsa?
No,
You don't really? Okay.
No.
There's not that familiarity there.
If it's old music,
Hmm.
like old Cuban music, let's say,
Hmm.
and I'm not too familiar with old, but they're similar to the Puerto Rican music, but not
Hmm.
quite, but yes.
Right.
Or old calypso, or old
Hmm.
what is it, the Jamaican
Reggae.
reggae, like the old stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, the spirit is there.
Hmm.
Yes, that root spirit is there. You can hear the earth in which they stood, where the microphones were at, where they
Hmm.
recorded what they recorded.
Yeah.
But when it's this cleaned up stuff,
Processed. Yeah.
it's not the same thing.
And that's why I think there will never be a replacement for the small venue performances and performers. Um, it's universally accepted, I think, for um, his by his fans and by people who just enjoy that type of music. That Stevie Ray live at El Macombo was one of the better performances ever recorded on video. And it's simply because it is small venue. There's not a lot of processing. The band is up there with their own gear that they brought in, and they're playing right there live in front of a small crowd.
The cameramen, the audio people, and the musicians,
Hmm.
and the crowd, and the structure,
Hmm.
perfect.
It made that performance, yeah.
Yes, that
And
quality, that quality that we're speaking of,
mhm,
was captured in that video.
at 100%.
Yeah,
If you've ever watched, and I mentioned him a lot, and I know it, but it's he's one of my favorites. If you've ever watched Stevie Ray with Albert King, um, they
I have.
did they were in a studio, but these two were sitting in the same room. The drummer was off in his own room, uh, and so was the bassist. But you had Albert King and Stevie Ray sitting there looking at each other in the same room, and they're talking and they're singing and playing, and it was like about 2 hours that they had to kind of edit down to just a few songs. And they did release an album, but it never really got as much traction as it deserved because there was some dynamite stuff in that entire session. And
I've seen clips of it.
yeah, oh man, it is great. Um, um, Jim's doctoral says, I think it was recorded in Hamilton, Ontario. I think you're right. I think you're right. Um, and they did, for instance, they did Matchbox Blues, and he started. Albert King is just talking to Stevie like, "I'm going to show you something here. Maybe we can do this together." And they just started playing, and Albert King started singing, and they got done with it, and they're both sitting there laughing. He goes, "Now, see, you might be able to do something with that." And Stevie's like, "Yeah, maybe I can. Maybe I can." Well, there you go. And then they got into another story and started playing another tune. And it was just those two swapping back and forth. And it was fantastic. Now, again, it was done in a studio, so I don't know if there was any equalization there, any EQ or any kind of reverb put on any. I really don't know what kind of processing was done. But it was two guys with guitars sitting there swapping licks back and forth and singing songs. And it was absolute dynamite. That's the kind of music I like.
We're still connected very much
Hmm.
today
Yeah, to the old
to
stuff.
we really are. And but the thing is, though, that's what that's what created the that's what came before, but those are the stories.
Yeah.
Those are the stories that forwarded, that we were in, that we listened to, that we ran across.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of these, just one final thing. I just want to say that in the Western world, hemisphere,
Hmm.
and you can say the same thing about many places, but I'm talking about here.
Hmm.
And I always make that difference because a lot of people and many people, I never like the saying of when you say something and they say, yeah, well, that happened over there too, or that happened over. It's kind of dismissive. I've heard it by many people, but because you can make similarities with many things across the world, stories and whatnot. But we have a Western hemisphere, Wild West, even though many people live on the East Coast more so than on the West,
Hmm.
but there's some pioneer, some pick up your suitcase, some, especially for my family, but that applies to everybody in different ways that are here.
Hmm.
And there's also an aspect of the Bandito, the Bonnie and Clyde, the all these themes
The
tossed,
Highwaymen.
tossed into a blender.
Hmm.
And that's the roots music. And I find it so I can't ignore it when I hear it. I'll leave it at that. I
Yeah.
know it when I hear it, and I can't ignore it and recognize it and give it its just due credit. And I don't
Hmm.
know it's because I'm American. I don't know it's because it's just good no matter where you're from. And I don't
Hmm.
know if it's generational, but I personally say that when I hear it, I can point at it
Hmm.
and without being scientific about it, although we have kind of been now today, I can say Americana,
Yeah.
and it's something special, and it also speaks to the culture at large
Hmm.
that's really always on the verge of collapse and fight. It's an incredible thing.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it is. It's an incredible thing. It's been called the great experience, the great experiment for over 200 years. I was talking about a few little things that I had historical. One little thing that I'll inject right here. Today in 1789, today marks the 235th anniversary of the inauguration of George Washington as the first president of the United States. It was 235 years ago today. So we've come a
And
long way since then. And you want to talk about Americana, it don't get much more Americana than that. You know, it also today in 1889 was the first federal holiday, and that was the celebration of the 100-year anniversary of George Washington being inaugurated as the first president of the United States. So we had first president and then the first federal holiday on or April 30th, 1789, and then in 1889.
when he was suggested for kingship,
Yeah, he didn't want to be president.
he set the bar. Now that, in addition,
Hmm.
yeah, that's a big deal
He set
because
many precedents with his 2 terms. He set a lot of standards that people have tried to live up to. And the 2 term president, he started that. He served 2 terms, then he left.
is there a rule for it though, or
There
a
is
law?
now. There is now. It was a congressional amendment. The president is limited to 2 terms, and that was after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who served 4 terms, well, 3 3/4 terms. He didn't survive his 4th term, so he died in office, and Harry Truman took over.
Dude, if I guess we'll wrap up with that, but
Mhm.
it it's not gonna happen because I'll forget or we'll have
Mhm.
other things of interest to talk about. But I saw a long sit down interview with a Kennedy,
Mhm.
and just the whole story.
Yeah.
plus the stuff. It's something worth a conversation, just to bounce back. But we're gonna forget about it at that point. But it just popped into my mind now talking about all these things. In any
Yeah.
event, let's wrap it up then.
All right.
We go live every Tuesday, 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time here on YouTube. The Trampled Underfoot podcast is the place to be on Tuesdays. We have a site over on Facebook, trampledunderfootpodcast.com, and we have a website on the internet. You can look that up, same name. We're also sponsored by.
Harneal Media. I hit the wrong button. Oh no. There it is. Harneal Media. I'm not going to say the line that he doesn't want me to say simply because, he doesn't want me to say it. And every once in a while, on a rare occasion, I'll do what he wants me to do. So there. Look, you know him, you love him. He's here in the chat all the time. I still don't know how the heck he does everything he does, but he does it. He does it very well, and he does it as he can also talk. He does it at a very competitive price. If you're looking to create or expand your web presence, maybe give your brand a little bit better legitimacy, there's no better way to do it than with a website. And the only person I would ever recommend would be Steve over at Harneal Media. Now, there's a link to Harneal Media in every video on this YouTube channel, and it's that way for a reason. It's because we feel that passionate about it. Find out why yourself. Head over to Harneal Media, that's HARNEAL media.com, sponsor of Trampled Underfoot Podcast.com.
Excellent. Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the conversation. Um, None of that was planned. We just went where. Um,
Absolutely none of it was planned.
we at all. We will catch you next week, and just enjoy yourselves. Do the things you love, and be safe. And nothing. We're out of here. Peace.
See ya.